I was getting ready to leave when I overheard the conversation. It was one of those moments where time seemed to freeze, like everything slowed down just enough for me to hear it, but not enough to stop it. "Dad's getting old," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "He won't even notice when it's gone." My stomach dropped. I wasn't supposed to hear that, but there it was, clear as day, like a punch in the gut. My daughter, Jessica, the woman I'd trusted more than anyone, was talking about me like I was some old fool, unaware that she had been taking everything from me. "Let's just drain the accounts, Tom," she continued. "We'll leave him the illusion of money, but it's ours for the taking." My son-in-law, Tom, was in on it too. I felt a rush of heat rise up in my chest, blood rushing to my ears. I'd worked my entire life for that money, for the security that had allowed me to retire in peace, to provide for Alina's care, for Jessica's future. And now it was all slipping away. All of it. I'd never been the kind of man to overreact, but that moment, it changed everything. I felt my hands tremble, but I stayed still, rooted to the spot, frozen with disbelief. The woman I raised, the one I'd given everything to, had been quietly robbing me for years. It wasn't just the money. No, it was far worse than that. It was the betrayal, the complete disregard for everything I'd ever done for her. The woman I had trusted to manage my estate, to care for me when the time came, was the one behind the theft. She didn't care about me, didn't care that I had worked long hours, poured my soul into building a future for my family. She cared about one thing, herself. For a moment I stood there in the hallway, staring at nothing, letting the weight of it all settle in. I wasn't sure what I was feeling: anger, hurt, confusion. But one thing was clear: I couldn't just let this slide. Not after everything. Not after how much I had given to her, how much I had sacrificed. I could hear their voices in the next room, but I didn't move. My feet felt like cement, as if I was too heavy to take the first step. But I knew I had to. There was no turning back now. The anger inside me started to harden, turning into something colder, something sharper. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her steal everything I had left. She thought she could play me like a fool. She thought I was too old to fight back. But I was, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I'd always been an engineer, someone who built things, who understood structure and design, who knew how to fix problems. I wasn't a fighter, but I knew how to solve problems. And right then, the problem in front of me was bigger than anything I had ever faced before. I had to think fast. I had to act fast. I straightened my tie, adjusting the Windsor knot that had become second nature over the years. I could still hear her voice in the background, but I tuned it out. I had to focus. The clock was ticking, and I had no time to waste. This wasn't just about money. This was about reclaiming what was mine, my life, my dignity, and my future. I reached for my jacket, slipping it on with a practiced ease, as if nothing had changed, as if everything was still normal. I could feel my heart pounding, my mind racing with all the things I needed to do. There was no more time for wondering, no more time for second thoughts. I had to move, and I had to move now. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt something shift within me. I wasn't just David Miller, the retired engineer, the father, the grandfather. No, tonight I was someone else. Someone who wouldn't let anyone take what was rightfully his. The drive to Jessica's house was a blur, my mind working through every possibility, every scenario. I couldn't let her see me coming. I couldn't let her know that I knew what she'd been doing. Not yet, but I would. When I pulled up to her house, the same house I had helped her buy years ago, I took a deep breath. The gates opened silently, welcoming me into her world, her perfect, pristine world built on my sweat and sacrifice. I got out of the car and walked up to the door. Tom was there to greet me, his smile too wide, too rehearsed. "David, good to see you," he said, clapping me on the back like everything was fine, like we hadn't just heard the most damning conversation of my life. "Good to see you too, Tom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I forced a smile, though I could feel it cracking under the weight of what I knew. I followed him inside, pretending to be the same man I was before I overheard that conversation. I was still David Miller, the father who showed up for dinner, the grandfather who pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was already planning my next move. The game had changed, and Jessica, Tom, and everyone else in that house wouldn't see it coming. I sat at the table, the smell of food heavy in the air, and I tried to keep my hands from shaking. I wasn't going to let them see anything. Not yet. But when the time came, when I had everything in place, they would see. They would see exactly who they had betrayed. And they would pay for it. If you want to know what happens next, make sure you're still watching. There's so much more to this story, things you won't believe until you see them for yourself. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the smile that used to light up my world, now twisted by greed and deception. I kept hearing those words in my mind. He won't even notice when it's gone. I had spent a lifetime building something solid, something real, and now my own daughter was taking it all. There was a tightness in my chest, a rage simmering just beneath the surface, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't just sit here and feel angry. No, I had to do something about it. I was 68 years old. Most men my age were slowing down, thinking about fishing or gardening or just sitting in their chairs, waiting for time to catch up with them. But not me. I had spent my life building bridges, literal and metaphorical. Engineering wasn't just a job for me. It was how I saw the world. It was about structure, balance, understanding what worked and what didn't. And right now, everything in my life felt like it was coming apart. It was like one of those projects where the math didn't add up and the foundation cracked under pressure. I had to fix it. I had to rebuild. As the sun came up, I put on my best suit, the one I saved for special occasions. It was charcoal gray, sharp, a little worn at the elbows but still strong, just like me. I adjusted the collar, straightened the lapels, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. There were the familiar wrinkles, the graying hair, the eyes that had once been full of optimism now clouded by betrayal. But under it all there was something else, something that hadn't been there before, something cold, something calculated. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a man with a plan. I grabbed my phone from the table and called Sam, my lawyer, my friend of 30 years. He wasn't the kind of guy who got rattled easily. But when I told him what had happened, I could hear the concern in his voice. "David, you need to be careful," Sam said. "You can't let Jessica know you know. If she suspects anything, she'll move fast. We need to gather evidence, and we need to do it quietly. Let me handle the legal side. You just focus on playing the part." It was the plan now. I had to be the old man she thought I was. I had to play dumb. I had to let her believe she was still in control. The idea of pretending to be weak, pretending I didn't know what was going on, made me sick to my stomach. But if I wanted to get my money back, I had no choice. I could hear Sam's voice in my head, urging me on, urging me to act like everything was normal. I had to smile, to ask about her husband Leo's soccer game, to show no sign that anything was wrong. The world she had built on my back, the house, the car, the jewelry, it all had to stay in place. I had to look like the oblivious father, the one who could barely keep track of his own finances, the one who couldn't make decisions without help. It was the perfect act. I just had to make sure I didn't crack under the pressure. I sat in the car outside Jessica's house, staring at the tall, gleaming building she called a home. It was big, it was expensive, and I had helped make it possible. I had been proud of her once. But now every inch of it felt like a lie. The money she had spent to build this, her house of glass and stone, had come from me, from my life's work. The life savings I had thought would protect me in my old age were now disappearing faster than I could track. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the betrayal, the violation of everything I had ever taught her. I walked up to the door, and before I could even knock, Tom was there, smiling that fake, too wide smile of his. "David, so good to see you," he said, his hand clapping me on the back a little too hard, like he owned me. "You too, Tom," I said, forcing a smile. It felt like my face might crack from the tension, but I held it together. "How's everything going?" "Oh, you know," he said, laughing in that way people do when they don't want to tell you the truth but think they're being clever. Big things on the horizon. A lot of exciting stuff happening, especially with Jessica's business. We're looking at some serious growth. I nodded, though inside I could barely contain myself. Exciting. Growth. All I could think about was how much of that growth had come from my bank account. And now here he was, patting me on the back like I was a fool, like I didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. Inside, everything was just as perfect as I imagined. Everything was meticulously arranged, polished, pristine. It was a house built to impress, but I wasn't impressed. I was angry. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the marble countertops, the sleek furniture, it all looked like a trophy, a monument to the fact that I had been played. I was a pawn in their game, but not anymore. Jessica walked in, her smile as bright as ever, though I could see the flicker of something behind her eyes. Maybe it was guilt, maybe not. I couldn't be sure. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not without a fight. "Dad, you made it," she said, her voice sweet, almost too sweet. She came up to me, her arms open for a hug, but I could see the cold calculation behind it. She wasn't hugging me because she loved me. She was hugging me because it was part of the act. I hugged her back, feeling the sharp edge of the diamond bracelet she was wearing dig into my side. That bracelet had cost more than most people's annual salary, a bracelet I'd paid for. "You look tired, Dad," she said, pulling back to look at my face. "Are you feeling okay?" I forced a chuckle. "Just a long week, sweetheart, nothing I can't handle." And just like that, we moved into the living room. It was all too perfect, too staged. The conversation flowed as it always did, about her business, her latest project, what was going on in her life. She didn't ask me much about mine. She never did. But then, just as I was about to settle in, she said something that made my heart skip a beat. "I've been looking at your reports, Dad," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "The market's shaky right now. I think we should reevaluate your strategy, move some things into safer investments like bonds, just to protect you, you know." It was perfect, a preemptive strike. She was trying to convince me that she was still looking out for me, still doing what was best for me, but I knew the truth. She was trying to lock down what little was left, and she thought I was too stupid to notice. I forced myself to look at her, to smile, to nod. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart," I said, my voice low but steady. "But there's no need. I trust you completely. You've taken such a weight off my shoulders." The relief in her eyes was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She thought she was in control. She thought she still had me fooled. But I wasn't fooled, not anymore. I stayed the rest of the evening, acting like the doting father, asking about Leo's soccer game, pretending everything was fine. The whole time I was planning my next move. The real game hadn't even started yet. If you want to see how the plan starts to unfold, stick around. There's so much more coming your way. You won't want to miss it. The next few days felt like a blur. I was going through the motions, but my mind was constantly racing. Every time I saw Jessica's face or heard her voice, all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, the cold-hearted scheme she had been running behind my back. I had been a fool to trust her, to believe that she would take care of me when I needed it most. But now I knew better, and it was time to act. I called Sam the next morning. He had always been my go-to guy for everything legal, but this wasn't just a legal battle. This was personal. This was family, and that made it worse. But Sam was calm, collected as always, and he laid out the plan. "We need to be strategic about this, David," he said. "We'll get the evidence we need, but it has to be done carefully. If she gets a whiff that everything could fall apart." I understood what he was saying. I had to keep playing the part, keep pretending to be the confused old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. It made my skin crawl, but it was the only way to get the information I needed without tipping my hand. The first thing I had to do was slow down. I couldn't make any sudden moves. I needed to get her to think I was still the same man she had been manipulating for all these years. The quiet, trusting father who would never question her judgment. I had to keep smiling to act like everything was fine, while I quietly built my case. Sam had already sent over the first set of documents for me to review: bank statements, investment portfolios, the works. I spent hours poring over them, scanning for anything that seemed out of place. But the numbers looked fine, or at least, that's what they wanted me to believe. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had to get a second opinion. So I called Chloe. She was a forensic accountant Sam had recommended, and I trusted her more than I trusted anyone else right now. "I need you to look at something," I told her. "There's more going on here than meets the eye. Something's not right with the numbers." She agreed to meet me the next day at Sam's office. When I walked into that office the next morning, I felt like a man preparing for war. I wasn't just dealing with a family dispute anymore. This was a full-scale battle. My entire life had been systematically stripped away, and now I had to fight back. But there was no room for emotion in this fight. If I was going to win, I needed to stay sharp, stay focused. Chloe was already there when I arrived, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, scanning through the same documents I had been reviewing. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I could feel the tension in the room. She knew how serious this was. "David," she said without looking up, "I've gone through the files and I'm starting to see a pattern. It's subtle, but it's there. Your daughter's been moving money around, transferring funds out of your accounts into what looks like a shell company." My heart sank. A shell company. I'd heard of these before, used to hide money, to launder it. And now I was hearing that my own daughter was doing this to me. "Elysian Designs, LLC," Chloe continued, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up more documents. "That's the company she's been funneling money through. It's tied to a luxury resort project in Mexico that your son-in-law is managing. The numbers don't lie, David. They're using your money to cover their losses in that project." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I had known they were bad with money, but this was something else entirely. They weren't just squandering my savings, they were gambling it away. And it was worse than I thought. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power. It was about control. And they had been using me to stay afloat. "How much have they taken?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe didn't look up from her screen, but I could hear the grim tone in her voice when she answered. "Over the last 2 years, they've drained nearly everything. Your retirement account, your brokerage account, they've been systematically emptying them, one withdrawal after another. It's all been disguised with fake reports, doctored PDFs, and phony statements. You've been kept in the dark this whole time." I sat there stunned, my mind racing. $3 million, gone, all of it. And all because I had trusted the one person in this world who I thought would never betray me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about my legacy, my future, Alina's future. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had built, and now it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let them win. Chloe pulled up more documents, more transactions, more evidence of their deceit. Each one was like a dagger in my chest, but I couldn't look away. I had to see it all. I had to know everything they had done to me. "This is just the beginning," Chloe said, pulling up a final set of documents. "But it's enough to show us exactly what's been happening. They've been laundering your money through this resort project, David. And it's not just your retirement accounts. They've been draining your savings, too. There's a series of wire transfers from your personal account that match exactly with payments to a company in Mexico. They're hiding the money there, trying to cover up their tracks." I stood up, feeling the weight of the betrayal bearing down on me. I had no idea what was worse: the fact that they had been stealing from me, or the fact that they had been lying to me for so long, thinking I wouldn't notice. "We need to act fast," Sam said, his voice low and determined. "They've made their move. Now it's our turn, but we need to play it smart. Jessica can't know that you know David. If she does, she'll destroy everything, wipe away any trace of evidence we have." I nodded, my mind already working, already planning the next step. The anger inside me was like a fire, burning hotter with each new piece of information. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to take control. I had to get back what was mine. And this time, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As I walked out of Sam's office, I knew what had to be done. I had a plan, and I was going to make them pay. But there was one thing I had to remember: timing was everything. If I moved too soon, if I made one wrong move, I could lose everything. But I wasn't about to lose, not this time. If you think you know what's coming next, you're wrong. You won't believe the twist that's about to unfold. Stick around, because this story is far from over. I spent the next few days walking through the motions, but every action felt more deliberate, more calculated. The shock and betrayal had started to settle, and in its place, something colder had taken root inside me. My mind was no longer racing with anger. Now it was sharp, focused, methodical. I was a man on a mission, and every step I took brought me closer to making them pay. I couldn't let Jessica or Tom know that I knew. That was the key. If they realized I was onto them, they would cover their tracks, move the last of the money, and destroy the evidence. So I kept up the act. The kindly father, the old man who was losing his touch, losing his grasp on reality. Every phone call, every conversation, every visit, they all had to look the same. I had to make them believe I was still the same man they had been manipulating all along. But I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I called Jessica one afternoon to arrange dinner at her place. I acted like I hadn't a care in the world, asking about the weather, about her husband Leo's latest soccer game. She seemed happy to hear from me, thrilled even. She didn't know that each time I spoke to her, I was taking notes, mental notes on every word she said, every little shift in her tone. The mask was slipping, and I was going to make sure I was the one who tore it off. I could feel the subtle tension in the air when I walked into Jessica's house that evening. It wasn't just the usual tension from her forced politeness. It was something else, something colder, something darker. I could tell she knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know exactly what it was. Tom was already there, wearing that confident smile he always had when he thought he was in control. "David, glad you could make it," he said, clapping me on the back a little too hard as always. His grip was firm, trying to assert dominance, but I wasn't fooled. I saw through it. "Good to be here," I replied, forcing a smile, my mind still running over the evidence that Chloe had pulled together. I couldn't afford to get distracted. Not now. Jessica appeared from the kitchen, looking as polished as ever, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes when she greeted me. It was almost imperceptible, but I knew her better than she thought. I could see it, the crack in her mask. "Dad, it's so good to see you," she said, wrapping her arms around me for a hug. It felt cold, forced. She wasn't hugging me because she missed me. She was hugging me because it was part of the act, but I played along. "You look great, sweetheart," I said, my voice warm but distant. "Everything good?" "Oh, everything's great," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. She was nervous. She was hiding something. I could feel it. Dinner was a blur. They talked about business, about their new ventures, about their plans for the future. All the while, I played my part, listening, nodding, asking the right questions, pretending I was interested in their lives. They wanted to impress me, to show me how well things were going for them. They didn't know that all their wealth, all their success, had been bought with my money. The real conversation, the one that would decide everything, hadn't even begun, but I could feel it building in the air between us. After dinner, as we sat in the living room, Jessica began to shift the conversation. "Dad, I've been thinking about your retirement accounts," she said, her voice taking on that sweet, caring tone I had heard so many times before. "You know, the market's been a little unstable lately, and I just think we should reevaluate your strategy. Move some of your funds into safer investments like bonds. Just to protect you, you know." It was the same pitch she'd given me before, the same fake concern. She had done it to keep me from checking on my accounts, to keep me from seeing the truth. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. "I appreciate it, Jessica," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But there's no need. I've been looking over the numbers myself. You've done a great job managing everything so far. I trust you." Her smile faltered just for a moment. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She hadn't expected me to push back. She hadn't expected me to start questioning her decisions. But I had to be careful. If I showed too much doubt, she'd catch on. So I let the conversation drift. I acted like nothing was wrong, like I was just a concerned father, but inside I was calculating my next move. As the night went on, I felt the familiar weight of the mask settling back over me. They didn't know I was watching them, studying them, learning their every move. But I was. The night ended like any other. Tom walked me to the door, his hand on my back, giving me that same possessive, almost suffocating touch. "David, great to see you," he said, his voice a little too smooth. "You too, Tom," I replied, stepping into the cold night air. The sky was clear, the stars shining above me, but I didn't feel at peace. Not yet. I drove home slowly, thinking about everything I had learned tonight. Jessica's nerves, Tom's too polished smile. They were both hiding something, and I was going to find out exactly what that something was. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers I had brought back with me. I spread them out, line after line, transaction after transaction. I knew I needed to act fast. Every day that went by was another day they had to cover their tracks, another day they could drain more from my accounts. But now I had the evidence. Now I had everything I needed. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them take what was mine. I had a plan and I was going to see it through. But I had to stay calm. I had to keep playing the game. If I made the wrong move, if I showed any weakness, they would slip away again. I wasn't going to let that happen, not this time. If you think you know what happens next, just wait. This is only the beginning. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when the tables turn. Keep watching. The next part of this story will leave you speechless. The next few days were a strange mix of routine and quiet tension. I went about my life as usual, though inside, I was far from calm. My days had become a game of pretending, of playing a role I wasn't sure I could continue much longer. Each moment I spent with Jessica and Tom felt like a calculated move on a chessboard, and I was one misstep away from losing. But I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. I had learned to build things that stood the test of time, and I wasn't going to let this betrayal break me. I kept reviewing the documents Chloe had given me, the wire transfers, the fake reports, the shell company. Each piece of evidence was a stark reminder of what was being stolen from me. But it wasn't just the money, it was the trust, the years of sacrifice, the life I had built for my family. That was the real crime, and it was something Jessica and Tom had taken for granted. I had to move carefully, slowly. One wrong move and the whole thing could fall apart. I was playing a long game, and every interaction I had with them had to be carefully measured. I couldn't let my anger show. I couldn't let them know I was onto them. Not yet. It was Tuesday when I decided to take the next step. I called Sam again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about gathering information anymore. This was about taking control. "Sam, I've got what we need," I said, my voice low. "I'm ready to move forward. It's time we make them feel the weight of what they've done. David, we need to be smart about this. If we go in too fast, if they know we're onto them, we risk losing everything. You have to keep playing the part. Just give me a little more time to gather the final pieces. Trust me, we'll get them, but we need to be patient." I hated hearing that. I was done being patient. I was done playing their game. But Sam was right. As much as I wanted to rip everything out from under them in one swift motion, I knew this had to be done carefully. "Fine," I said, swallowing my frustration. But I'm done sitting on the sidelines. Let's move." Sam assured me that he was already working on the next phase, gathering additional evidence, tightening the legal framework, preparing the case for when the time was right. But I wasn't going to sit idly by while they drained my accounts and buried their tracks. I needed to find a way to push them to make a mistake. That evening, I invited Jessica over for dinner again. The plan was simple: act normal, keep the conversation light, make sure she felt comfortable, like everything was fine. But this time, I had a new strategy. I needed to push her just a little, test the waters to see if she was getting too comfortable, too cocky. If she was, it would be the opening I needed. "Dad, it's so nice that you're taking time out of your busy week to spend with us," Jessica said, her voice the perfect blend of sweetness and practiced care. She had become so good at pretending, at acting like the loving daughter. But I could hear the cracks in her facade now. I wasn't buying it anymore. Not after everything. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, keeping my voice steady, calm, even though everything inside me was screaming. I knew what she was doing, knew the manipulation that lay behind every smile. But I wasn't going to show her that I knew. Not yet. Dinner was much like the last few times, surface-level chatter, empty compliments, but there was something different this time. There was an edge to her tone, a slight impatience in the way she spoke to me. Maybe she was feeling the heat. Maybe she knew something was coming. Either way, it didn't matter. I was in control now, and I was going to make sure I stayed that way. After dessert, we moved to the living room. I knew this was the moment to push, to test just how far Jessica was willing to go. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night about moving some of my investments," I said, acting casual, though the words felt like a weight in my mouth. "But I've got to say, I'm not sure. I think I need to take a different direction. I've been looking at some other options." Jessica's face shifted just slightly, just enough for me to catch it. A flicker of concern crossed her eyes, but it was gone almost instantly, replaced by that practiced smile. "Oh, Dad, you don't need to worry about any of that. I'm here to help you," she said, her voice too sweet, too reassuring. "I've been looking out for you. Everything is going according to plan." I let the silence linger for a moment, watching her. I wasn't going to let her brush me off this time. I needed to make her sweat. "I don't know," I said slowly. "It feels like the market's been moving in strange ways lately. Maybe I should just sell the house and move to somewhere more manageable, a smaller place. Arizona, maybe, something simple." Her smile faltered just for a moment before she quickly recovered. "Dad, you can't be serious. That house, it's where you and Mom built a life. It's too valuable to sell." I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. "It's a lot of upkeep. Maybe I'm just tired of dealing with it all." Her eyes widened, and for the briefest second I could see the panic begin to set in. "Dad, no, you can't do that. We can make things easier. There are other ways to take care of it. We can hire help. You don't have to make any drastic decisions." I smiled, leaning forward. "I'm just thinking out loud, sweetheart. No need to worry, but you're right. Maybe I'll hold off. I just want to feel like I'm in control again." The relief that washed over her face was unmistakable. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. She was so desperate to keep me in the dark, to make sure I didn't catch on. But she didn't realize that I was already steps ahead. "Of course, Dad. Whatever makes you feel comfortable," she said quickly, almost too quickly. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider her words. I wasn't fooled. I knew what was happening, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she made another mistake, and when she did, I would be ready. The night ended as it always did, with polite pleasantries and goodbyes. But as I drove home, I knew things were starting to shift. Jessica was slipping. The pressure was getting to her, and I could feel it. It wouldn't be long before she made another move, and when she did, I'd be waiting. I wasn't done yet. The game had just begun. If you think you know what happens next, just wait. Things are about to get much more intense. Stick around. You won't believe what happens when the trap finally springs. The days after that dinner were tense, but there was a certain calmness to it all. It was as if everything had slowed down, the storm holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to strike. I could feel Jessica and Tom growing more nervous, and the feeling was palpable. They knew something was off, even if they didn't know exactly what. But they were too arrogant, too sure of themselves to admit it. I, on the other hand, was playing the long game. I wasn't going to give them any hints that I knew. Not yet. It was a week later when I got the first real sign that they were starting to crack. I had gone to the bank, just like I'd always done, to make sure things were still in order. I'd been putting it off for a while. Just another thing Jessica had told me to leave to her, to avoid the hassle of paperwork and new staff. But today, I decided I had to check for myself. The moment I walked in, I was greeted by a new teller, a young woman who smiled politely but didn't know me from Adam. I handed her my account information, my ID, just like I'd done 1,000 times before. She seemed flustered at first, tapping away on the keyboard, frowning at the screen. And then it happened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice shaky, "but there seems to be an issue with your account. It's been flagged for a review." "Flagged?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though I felt a knot twist in my stomach. "What kind of review?" The teller hesitated, then lowered her voice, as though she were worried someone might hear. "There have been a lot of recent transfers and, withdrawals. We've noticed a pattern that doesn't align with your usual activity." My heart dropped. I had trusted Jessica to manage things, but this was something else. This was a red flag. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of what was happening bearing down on me. My own daughter was behind it all. "I'd like to speak to the manager," I said, trying to keep my tone calm, but I could feel the tension rising in me. The teller nodded quickly and rushed off to get the manager. I stood there, the silence around me growing thicker, the air heavier. I was ready to leave the bank, but I needed answers. I needed to know just how deep this betrayal went. I wasn't leaving without them. The manager came over a few minutes later, a middle-aged man with glasses, who immediately looked at me with a level of concern that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Miller, I understand you've been having some issues with your account," he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice tight. "I've been told there's some sort of flag on my account, and I'd like to know what's going on." He nodded and pulled up my records. I stood there, watching as he clicked through several tabs on his screen, his face growing more serious by the second. "Well, Mr. Miller, it appears there have been several large withdrawals and transfers in the past few months, all from your retirement accounts. The transactions don't match the typical behavior of someone your age, and they're mostly going to an entity called Elysian Designs LLC. Elysian Designs LLC. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the same shell company Chloe had found in her forensic accounting work. My daughter was funneling my money into a resort project, one that her husband, Tom, was apparently managing. They had used a fake name, a phantom company, to hide their theft, and now it was all starting to unravel. "I wasn't aware of any of this," I said, my voice low, controlled. "How much has been withdrawn?" The manager paused, clicking through more records. "It looks like upwards of $2 million, Mr. Miller." $2 million. Gone, just like that. My retirement savings, my peace of mind, everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made for my family was slipping through my fingers. "I want to see the full transaction history," I demanded, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. The manager didn't argue. He printed out the full report and handed it to me. My hands were shaking as I took the papers from him. The list of transactions was long, a series of dates and amounts, all flowing from my accounts to Elysian Designs LLC. The pattern was clear. Jessica had been siphoning off my money for over a year, covering it with doctored reports and false assurances. I stood there in the bank, staring at the papers in front of me. Every single withdrawal was like a stab in the chest. And yet, despite everything, I knew I couldn't stop now. This wasn't just about money. It was about making them pay for what they had done to me. They thought they could take everything from me, hide behind lies and fake concern, but they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, not after everything. I left the bank that day with a new resolve. I knew now that Jessica wasn't just stealing my money, she was trying to erase me, to erase everything I had built. She thought she could control everything from the money to the narrative, but she was wrong. I had a plan, and it was time to set it into motion. That evening, I made another call to Sam. I was done sitting back and letting them win. It was time for the final act. "I've got the evidence," I said, my voice steady with determination. "It's time to go after them." Sam didn't hesitate. "Are you sure? We can still gather more, David. We can take this slow." "No," I said, my tone firm. "It's time. I'm done waiting." "All right," Sam said. "I'll start getting things in motion. But remember, once we go public with this, there's no going back." "I know," I replied, "but I'm ready. Let's do it." The moment I hung up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. The cold anger that had been simmering for so long was gone. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Something sharper. Something that wouldn't stop until I had reclaimed everything they had stolen from me. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. I knew the fight wasn't over yet. But I also knew that Jessica and Tom had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was too old, too weak to fight back. But they were wrong. And now they were going to learn just how wrong they were. If you think the fight is over, think again. The real battle is about to begin, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Keep watching, because the game is about to change. The next few days were a blur of quiet tension and calculated moves. I had given Sam the go-ahead to start the legal process, but the truth was, I wasn't waiting for him. I couldn't. Not anymore. Every moment I spent sitting still was a moment they could use to cover their tracks, to try and slip away from what they'd done. I had to act. I had to take matters into my own hands now. The bank had handed me the evidence, but it wasn't enough yet. Not nearly enough. There were still holes in the story, pieces that didn't quite fit, and I couldn't go to Sam until I knew for sure that I had everything. So I decided to make one more visit to Jessica's house, one more opportunity to see what else I could find. I'd been preparing for this moment, running through all the scenarios in my head. If I just walked in there asking questions, it would look suspicious. But if I could slip in, find something they hadn't hidden well enough, then I'd have everything I needed to make my next move. I called Jessica that afternoon. The tone of my voice was calm, nonchalant. "Hey, sweetheart, I've been thinking about the house. Maybe it is time for a change. You've been right about everything else. Maybe I should just let go of the old place." "Oh, Dad," Jessica said, her voice almost too eager, "I'm so glad you're coming around. It's just so much work, and honestly, it's such a huge responsibility. We can help you with all the paperwork, with everything. You don't need to worry about it." I could hear the relief in her voice, and it made me sick. She thought I was still the same clueless old man she could manipulate. She didn't know I was already steps ahead. "I thought I'd come by and take a look at some of the paperwork," I said casually, "just to see where everything stands." The line went quiet for a moment. Then, in a tone that tried to mask the tension, Jessica said, "Of course, Dad, we'll be here." I hung up the phone, feeling a chill settle in the pit of my stomach. This was it. I was walking into the lion's den. I was walking into the home that had once represented love, family, trust. Now it felt like the enemy's lair, a place of betrayal where I had to tread carefully. I drove over to their house, the familiar street with its expensive homes and pristine lawns. I pulled into the driveway where I had parked 1,000 times before, never suspecting a thing. Now, every step I took towards the front door felt heavy, deliberate. The door opened just as I reached the porch. Tom stood there, grinning like he had no idea what was about to hit him. "David, glad you could make it," he said, his voice warm and welcoming, but I could hear the faintest edge of something else. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just nerves. Either way, I didn't care. I was beyond pleasantries now. "You know me, Tom," I said with a grin that felt too tight on my face. "I never turned down a good offer." I followed him inside, noting how the house looked the same as always, clean, polished, meticulously arranged. I could feel Jessica's presence before I even saw her. She was waiting in the living room, sitting on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. The moment she saw me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was as fake as everything else she'd done. "Dad," she said, her voice soft and sweet. "Come sit down. We were just going over the plans. Everything is set up for you. We've got a plan for the house, for your finances. You won't have to worry about anything." I nodded, sitting down slowly, my eyes scanning the room. I had to find something. There had to be something I could use, something I could take back with me, a clue that would confirm the truth of what had been happening all along. Tom and Jessica were talking to me, going over the numbers, showing me fake projections on the new investment they'd been helping me with. The figures they had drawn up looked official, clean, but I knew better. Every number, every line was a lie. I let them talk, nodding occasionally, but my mind was elsewhere. I knew the layout of the house. I knew where she kept everything, files, documents, things I hadn't thought about for years, the office in the back, the drawer where her personal papers were kept. I excused myself from the conversation under the pretense of needing the bathroom. I had to be quick. I had to be smart. I wasn't going to give them any reason to question me. I made my way through the house, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the office. The door was slightly ajar and I pushed it open slowly. There it was, the desk, the papers, the computer. I walked up to the desk, my fingers trembling as I sorted through the files, looking for anything that could give me what I needed. It didn't take long before I found it. A folder marked with the name of the shell company, Elysian Designs LLC. I opened it. Inside there were copies of wire transfers, more doctored reports, and, just as I feared, documents that listed the beneficiary of several of my accounts as the company, not me. My stomach churned, but I didn't hesitate. I took the folder and tucked it under my arm, making sure it was hidden. I couldn't let them know I had found it. I quickly left the office and made my way back to the living room, where Jessica and Tom were still talking. "Oh, I was just checking something in the office," I said, smiling at them like nothing had changed. "I'll take a look at these papers when I get back home. Thanks for keeping track of everything for me." Tom nodded and Jessica gave me that same fake smile. "Of course, Dad, whatever you need." I said my goodbyes and left, my heart hammering in my chest. I had what I needed. I had the proof, the final piece of the puzzle, but now I had to decide how to use it. I walked back to my car, the weight of the folder in my hand feeling like a heavy burden. But this wasn't a burden, it was my weapon. This was the moment. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not anymore. I drove back home, my mind already working out the next steps. The evidence was there. The time had come. I wasn't going to waste another second. The trap was set. It was just a matter of letting them walk right into it. If you think you know what happens next, just wait. The walls are closing in, and the reckoning is about to begin. Stick around, because this story is far from over. The silence in my house felt deafening as I stood in the kitchen, the folder heavy in my hands. I hadn't expected to feel this weight, the weight of knowing what was coming next, the weight of what had been taken from me. But there was no turning back now. I had the evidence. I had everything I needed to expose Jessica and Tom for what they were. The quiet rage I had felt in the days leading up to this moment had now crystallized into something colder, something more precise. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming control of my life. I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the soft light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows across the pages. There it was, everything laid out in black and white. The wire transfers, the false documents, the forged signatures. Every piece of evidence that showed how my own daughter had been draining my accounts and using my hard-earned money to fund a failed resort project in Mexico, and all of it hidden under the guise of taking care of me. The anger inside me simmered, but it was tempered by something sharper now: determination. I wasn't just going to expose them for the criminals they were. No, this was about making sure they paid for every penny they had stolen. The thought of them living in their newly renovated house, driving their new cars, spending the money they'd taken from me while I had been left to struggle in my own home, it made my blood boil. But more than that, I felt a deep sense of betrayal, a betrayal that went beyond money. They had stolen my dignity, my trust, and now I was going to take it all back. I dialed Sam's number, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. When he answered, his voice was calm, like it always was, but I knew he could hear the change in my tone. The time for talking was over. "I've got everything, Sam," I said, my voice low but clear. "I'm ready, let's end this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sam knew how much was at stake. He had seen me go from the man who trusted his family without question to the man who was ready to destroy them. But this wasn't personal for him. He was a lawyer, and this was his job. He knew how to fight this battle, and he was good at it. "David, you have to be sure. This isn't just about getting your money back. Once we go public with this, there's no going back. You'll be tearing your family apart." I took a deep breath, looking at the folder spread out before me. "I've already lost them, Sam. The moment Jessica decided to take from me, she lost me too. I'm not going to sit back and let them destroy me anymore." Sam sighed, and I could hear the quiet understanding in his voice. "All right, we'll proceed, but I need to know you're ready for the consequences. Once we make this move, there's no turning back." "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. "I want to make sure they feel the weight of what they've done." "Good," Sam replied. "I'll start preparing the legal documents. We'll subpoena their financial records, and we'll get everything we need to make sure they pay for this." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. I had set the wheels in motion, and now all I had to do was wait. But even as I sat there, the weight of the folder in my hands, I knew that the hardest part was still to come. The next few days felt like a slow-motion countdown. I stayed out of contact with Jessica and Tom, letting them think everything was fine. I kept up the act, pretending to be the oblivious, aging father who couldn't keep track of his own finances. They had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead of them. But I could feel the tension building. Every phone call, every interaction felt like they were just a little bit closer to cracking. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the power they had taken from me, the trust they had violated. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was taking back my dignity. I met Sam at his office on a Wednesday afternoon. The moment I walked in, I could feel the weight of what was happening. Sam wasn't just preparing legal documents anymore. He was preparing for war. There were papers everywhere, files stacked high, and Chloe, the forensic accountant, was there too, reviewing the financial documents we had uncovered. The pieces were finally coming together. "We've got them," Sam said, his voice calm but sharp with certainty. "Chloe's been going through the records, and we've built a solid case. The wire transfers are documented, the shell company, the forged signatures. We've got all the evidence we need." Chloe looked up from her computer screen and nodded. They didn't cover their tracks as well as they thought. Every transaction, every withdrawal is linked to that resort project in Mexico. We've got their trail. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction wash over me. It was all finally coming together. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I was just some old man who wouldn't know better, but they had underestimated me. "You've done good work, Chloe," I said, my voice steady. "Now let's make sure they can't run from this." Sam leaned forward, locking eyes with me. "David, we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more they'll try to cover their tracks. Once we go public with this, they'll have no place to hide." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. This was it. There was no going back now. "Let's do it," I said. "Make it happen." The next few days passed in a blur. We filed the necessary documents, gathered the last of the evidence, and prepared to present our case. But as I sat in my car outside the courthouse, waiting for the final call to begin the legal proceedings, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal. I had spent my entire life building something, a family, a future, a legacy, and in an instant it had all been torn apart. But now I was going to take it all back. And when it was over, I wasn't just going to have my money. I was going to have my peace. If you think you know how this ends, think again. What happens next will surprise you, and it will change everything. Stick around because the final act is about to unfold, and it's one you won't forget. The final moment was drawing near, and everything felt heavier than I could have imagined. I sat in my car, the engine running, my hands resting on the steering wheel as I stared at the courthouse doors in front of me. This wasn't just a court case. This wasn't about reclaiming money or property. This was a reckoning. My entire life had been turned upside down, and today I was going to make sure Jessica and Tom faced the consequences of their actions. I had spent years building something solid, a life that had meaning, a legacy. But in the blink of an eye, that life had been shattered by greed, lies, and betrayal. And I hadn't fought back because I was angry or bitter. No, I fought back because I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, cannot be repaired by just standing idly by. You either reclaim what was taken or you let them keep it. I wasn't about to let them keep anything that didn't belong to them. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was almost time for the hearing to begin. My lawyer, Sam, had been handling the legal side of things, preparing the case, gathering the evidence, and setting everything in motion. Chloe, the forensic accountant, had done her job, mapping every illicit transfer, showing exactly how they had been stealing from me for months, if not longer. But this wasn't just a battle of documents. This was a battle of hearts and minds. The courtroom would be full of witnesses, some paid off by Jessica and Tom, others completely oblivious to the truth. The stakes were high and the nerves were starting to take over. I hadn't been this anxious in a long time. But as the engine hummed beneath me, I realized I had one advantage over Jessica and Tom that they couldn't even begin to comprehend. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my dignity, for my place in this world. And that made all the difference. I opened the door, stepped out of the car, and adjusted my suit. I wasn't the man who had been manipulated into trusting his own family. I was someone else now, someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. When I walked into the courthouse, I felt the weight of every step. I wasn't just another aging retiree waiting to sign some documents or give a simple statement. I was there to change the course of my life. The waiting room was filled with people, but they all seemed so insignificant to me now. There was only one thing that mattered. Today was the day I would take back control. I spotted Sam across the room. He gave me a brief nod, his face set in that familiar grim expression. He knew what this meant just as much as I did. We didn't need to speak. We had already discussed everything we needed to know. The plan was simple: present the evidence, expose Jessica and Tom for the frauds they were, and let the court decide the rest. But as I walked towards him, I realized I was no longer just a part of this story. I had become the architect of my own redemption, and that, in itself, was the most powerful thing I could do. The courtroom was cold. The walls felt like they were closing in, but I couldn't back down now. I sat at the table across from Jessica and Tom, trying my best to remain composed, but inside I was a storm. Sam sat next to me, prepared to unleash the weight of everything we had uncovered. Behind us sat Chloe, her sharp eyes scanning the room as she waited for her moment to testify. The judge walked in and the room fell silent. There was no turning back now. "Mr. Miller, are you ready to proceed?" the judge asked, looking at me from across the bench. I nodded. "We're ready, Your Honor." Jessica's lawyer stood up first, making a grand gesture of sympathy. "Your Honor," he said in his most polished, rehearsed voice, We are here today out of concern for Mr. Miller. He is an elderly man, a widower, who has made some rash decisions in recent months regarding his financial matters. My clients have only been trying to protect him from making a decision that could jeopardize his future. I wanted to stand up and shout, "Jeopardize my future." They were the ones jeopardizing everything I had worked for, but I held my tongue. This wasn't about emotions. This was about facts. "Your Honor," Sam said as he stood, his voice firm and precise, "we are here to show that the actions of Mr. Miller's daughter and son-in-law are not motivated by concern. They are motivated by greed. Mr. Miller's accounts have been systematically drained over the past 2 years. Evidence will show that the funds were funneled through a shell company, Elysian Designs LLC, which is controlled by Mr. Miller's daughter, Jessica Miller." There was a collective shift in the room as the court murmured. I could see Jessica's face pale slightly, her eyes darting between the judge and Sam. She was trying to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks starting to show. "We have presented detailed records," Sam continued, "showing that substantial amounts of Mr. Miller's retirement funds as well as personal savings have been transferred into accounts under Jessica and Tom Miller's control. This is not a misunderstanding. This is fraud." Sam turned to Chloe, signaling her to present the evidence. She stood and walked up to the witness stand, opening a binder filled with documents and financial statements. With the click of a projector, the screen behind her lit up with charts, timelines, and transaction logs, each more damning than the last. Chloe's voice was calm, methodical as she explained how the withdrawals had been masked by doctored documents and how every major financial decision had been made to hide the truth. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as Chloe systematically dismantled the defense. Each lie, each forged signature, each hidden transfer was laid bare for everyone to see. Jessica's lawyer tried to interrupt, but it was clear that the tide had turned. Every word Chloe spoke seemed to sink into the hearts of the jury, the judge, and even the few who had sided with Jessica. The evidence was undeniable. Then it was my turn. I had never been a man who liked to talk much, but I had to now. This wasn't just for me. This was for the years of trust I had given to my own flesh and blood. This was for the legacy I had spent my life building, only to see it torn apart by the people I loved. I stood and walked slowly to the stand. My legs felt steady, my heart was calm. I looked directly at Jessica and Tom, my eyes unwavering. "Your Honor," I began, my voice carrying through the courtroom. "I spent my life building something, a family, a future, a place for my children to grow, but everything I worked for has been taken from me, and when I discovered what was happening, I knew I had to take it back, not because I wanted revenge, but because they left me no choice." I paused, letting my words sink in. They thought I was too old, too weak, too naive to notice. But I'm here to tell you that I see it now. I see everything. And I want the court to know that no one has the right to take what is mine. I looked at Jessica, the woman who had once been my little girl. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking just slightly. "You were the one person I thought would never betray me, but you did." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I could see Jessica, her hands trembling slightly, her face pale. She wasn't the daughter I once knew. She was a stranger. I turned to the judge, feeling a strange sense of peace come over me. "I want justice, Your Honor. I want them to understand the consequences of their actions." The judge nodded, her expression unreadable as she took in everything that had been presented. "And we will make sure they face the full extent of the law," she said quietly. As the courtroom session adjourned, I felt the weight of the years of betrayal starting to lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but it was close. I had taken back control, and no one would ever be able to take it from me again. Stay tuned for the final chapter. You won't believe how this story ends. Trust me, this is one you don't want to miss. The weeks after the court hearing were a blur of legal battles, paperwork, and growing anticipation. The feeling of walking out of that courtroom, of having said my piece, of having finally confronted the people who had betrayed me, lingered in the back of my mind like a weight that had been lifted. But there was still so much to be done. The fight wasn't over yet. As the days passed, I watched as Jessica and Tom's world slowly began to unravel. Sam had filed subpoenas, demanding the original financial records from their banks, their investment firms, and from the shell company they'd been funneling money through. The pressure was mounting on them, and as much as they tried to cover their tracks, the truth was coming to light. Every lie, every manipulation was being exposed piece by piece. I spent a lot of time in my quiet house. The place that once felt like a home full of laughter and warmth now felt like a cold battleground. I was alone, but the solitude didn't bother me anymore. I had made my peace with the fact that the family I thought I knew was gone. I wasn't the same man who had blindly trusted them anymore. I had been broken down, yes, but now I was rebuilding. And this time, I wasn't just rebuilding my finances. I was rebuilding my dignity. Sam called me one afternoon, his voice low but filled with that quiet confidence I had come to rely on. "David, we're about to make our move. The final hearing is set for next week. Everything's in place." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. How much longer before this is over? A few more days. The final documents will be presented and the court will make its ruling. I can't say for sure what the outcome will be, but with everything we've gathered, it's hard to see how they can avoid the consequences. I could hear the weight of his words. He didn't need to tell me the severity of it. I had already seen the evidence. I knew the depth of the fraud. Jessica and Tom were cornered. There was no way out now. "Good," I said, my voice firm. "I'm ready. Whatever happens next, I'm ready." The final court date arrived, and this time there was no pretense, no playing nice. This was it, the moment everything came to a head. I arrived at the courthouse early, the anticipation building with every step. Sam met me in the hallway, looking as prepared as ever. Chloe was with him, her sharp eyes scanning the room, making sure everything was in order. "I have to say, David," Sam said as we walked together toward the courtroom, "this has been one of the most cut-and-dried cases I've ever worked on. The evidence is overwhelming, but we still have to let the court decide." "I know," I replied, my voice steady, "but I don't think there's any doubt left in anyone's mind." We took our seats, and soon the room filled with people. Jessica and Tom walked in, their eyes darting nervously around the room, though they still tried to maintain their composure. Tom, in particular, looked like he was holding his breath, like he couldn't believe the walls were closing in on him. The judge entered and the proceedings began. This time there was no grand speech from Jessica's lawyer. He seemed smaller somehow, as if he knew what was coming. There was no smoke and mirrors, no twisting of facts. The evidence was laid out, plain and clear. Each document, each financial record, each piece of testimony from Chloe, everything pointed directly to Jessica and Tom. There was no denying it. When it was time for my statement, I stood up, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I wasn't nervous. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that people understood that actions have consequences. I took a breath, my voice carrying through the courtroom as I spoke. "Your Honor, I spent my life working for what I have. I built everything with my own hands, and I trusted the people closest to me to look out for my future. What I didn't realize was that they were more interested in taking from me than protecting me. I didn't know that the people I loved would betray me, but I know now, and I won't let them get away with it." I paused, letting my words sink in. Jessica's face, which had remained calm throughout most of the hearing, now looked pale. Tom's hands were clenched in front of him, and he refused to meet my eyes. I could feel their guilt radiating off of them, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about making them feel bad. This was about making them understand that they couldn't just take what didn't belong to them. "I'm here today," I continued, "not just to reclaim my money, but to take back my dignity. To remind everyone that betrayal doesn't just hurt the person you steal from, it destroys the trust that holds a family together. And that, your honor, is something that can never be fixed. The courtroom was silent. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. It didn't take long for the judge to render her decision. The evidence was irrefutable. Jessica and Tom were found guilty of financial fraud and elder abuse. Their assets were frozen and legal actions were set in motion to recover the money they had stolen. As for the consequences, there would be hearings, restitution, and possibly even jail time. The exact sentencing would come later, but the verdict was clear. They had been caught. There was no escaping it. I sat there, my heart still heavy, but a small weight lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the punishment. It was about knowing that I had done everything I could to make them face what they had done. They had taken from me, but now they were going to pay the price. I walked out of that courthouse with my head held high, knowing that I had reclaimed what was mine. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The final chapter of this journey had been written. The storm had passed, the truth had won, and I had my dignity back. This was the last part of the story, but it's one I'll never forget. And if you've made it this far, I hope you remember that sometimes standing up for yourself means facing the hardest truths and knowing that you're stronger than any betrayal life throws at you.